Okay, so it's time for us to go ahead and get back into our coverage over X-Men. Not X-Men, X-Man, because Nate Gray is going to be very important for the next few videos we're going to do on the channel. Now, we're going to jump back over to his solo series with issue number 8 and issue number 9, because this kind of kicks off the whole idea of X-Men finally meeting other characters from this reality. Now, technically, he already did somewhat, but now it's him kind of meeting the major characters like Charles Xavier, the X-Men, and also there's a two-part story arc in our next video where he meets Excalibur. But for right now, it's X-Men going up against Charles Xavier, but also meeting Rogue. Now, this is kind of picking up where our last video had left off at when it comes to Nate Gray, because in our last video for Nate, he was confronted by Dark Beast. Now, let's not forget that Dark Beast and Nate Gray both come from the same reality, better known as Age of Apocalypse. Now, in that reality, Mr. Sinister was the one who had created Nate Gray as a way to take down Apocalypse in that reality. But here's the thing. Dark Beast also found out that when it came to Sinister, he put in safeguards in the body of Nate Gray, because for Nate, someone so powerful enough to take down Apocalypse, what would happen after? Somebody with that kind of power would be dangerous for the entire world. But either way, with both characters now being in the main Marvel universe, it's really more now Dark Beast saying like, hey, you should join my side, because in this reality, mutants are not first class. Humans are first class. Mutants are second class. They're hated on by the human race. And so for Dark Beast, he wanted to change that. Now for Nate, he knows how evil Dark Beast is because he heard about Dark Beast. But either way, once you did have Nate defeat Dark Beast, he left, and his goal was to head over to the home of the X-Men to see if they can possibly help him. And so that is where our video kind of picks up at, because you now have Nate Gray trying his best to fly over the ocean, over to America to just get over to the X-Men. The problem is that he ran into a hurricane. And so right now he's having one of his spells where he begins to get weakened by using his powers too much. And so unfortunately, he does crash in the middle of the body of water. Now, luckily for Nate Gray, he does end up on the shore. And when he does, he is found by somebody who then takes him in. But now we have to transition over to the character known as Blacksmith. Now for Blacksmith, he's just like Cable from the far future. The thing is, both characters are from the same clan, the Ascani clan. Now here's the thing about Blacksmith though. For Blacksmith, his main goal is to make sure that Cable stays on the same path that was laid out for him by the Ascani. And so he also came back in time like Cable did. But the thing for Blacksmith is that he had picked up on the powers of Nate Gray and realized that Nate's powers are very similar to Cable. Now for Blacksmith, he believed that Strife has returned. And so he's kind of like, okay, if Strife has returned, that is a huge problem. But came to find out that's not the case. It's somebody else who's just like Cable, but without the techno-organic virus. But he also realized that Nate Gray is heading over to Charles Xavier. And so you have Blacksmith go over to Charles and say, hey, listen, you might have some company very soon who wants to talk to you. Now, for Nate Gray, he was found earlier on the shore by some kind of sheriff of the nearby town that he was in. And you have the sheriff take Nate over to a nearby prison. And the reason why, because to just give him a bed. Now, once you do have Nate wake up, you had this guy say, you know what? Let me go ahead and go out of my way to feed you, because it does look like you are starving. And I did find you in the middle of that hurricane storm. Now, jumping back over to Charles Xavier and Blacksmith, this is the first time these two characters are officially meeting one another. Now, for these two characters, they begin to discuss how they both detected the powers of Nate Gray. Now, for Charles, he had picked on Nate Gray weeks ago when Nate Gray had crashed on Earth after leaving the Age of Apocalypse reality. The problem for Charles was that Nate Gray was able to cloak himself, so Charles was not able to figure out where Nate Gray was at. Now, for Blacksmith, we already know how. thanks to machines out there that have picked up on somebody who's very similar to Cable. Either way, it's the two guys saying like, we should come together and find this person because this person is really powerful. More powerful than Cable, but more powerful than Charles Xavier. And that right there is kind of scary. Now, for Nate Gray, it's still him trying to discover what this world is truly like. And let me explain, because for Nate Gray, it's him now with the sheriff at this diner. Now, while at the diner, the conversation of how humans hate on mutants came up very quickly, because you do have Nate Gray find a newspaper. In that newspaper, it talks about the legacy virus, how it evolved and now going after humans as well. And the sheriff who saved Nate earlier says, listen, I hate the idea of the legacy virus killing off humans, but I don't mind the virus killing off mutants. Now for Nate Gray, he's kind of like, wait a second, you just saved my life earlier. Let me tell you right now that I am a mutant. And you have everybody in the diner to stop what they're doing and look at Nate Gray like, what? You're a mutant? Disgusting. This is the first example of Nate Gray experiencing hatred towards him because he is a mutant. But now we had to switch over to Charles Xavier and also Blacksmith. Now for these two characters, they're beginning to freak out. And the reason why, because, well, they got to find Nate Gray at a faster rate. Now, luckily for Charles, he has his astral form. And so you have Charles use the astral form as a way to go locate Nate Gray, to at least kind of observe him, but then kind of have a conversation with Nate Gray as well. But for Nate Gray, he's beginning to freak out because he kind of realized that, yes, in this reality, mutants are hated on by the human race a lot, to the point where he's kind of like, oh, y'all don't really have an actual reason to hate on us. It's just because we are different. That right there is not okay at all. But you also have Nate Gray use his powers to make every single person in this building forget that he was even there. Now for Charles, he saw that happen and kind of realized how powerful Nate truly is to just blink and make everyone forget that he was even there. But right after that, you didn't have Nate Gray detect the presence of Charles Xavier. And this kind of leads into a battle between the two characters. And the reason why, because to Nate Gray, he believes that Charles is actually an enemy. And matter of fact, you have Nate Gray pull Charles out of the astral plane to do battle against him. Now for Charles, he's trying his best to convince Nate that the only reason why he's here is to help Nate, to help him control his abilities, like Charles has done for other people in the past. Now you also have Charles tell Nate like, hey, listen, I am Charles Xavier. I am the leader of the X-Men. But for Nate Gray, in his timeline, there was no Charles Xavier. And the reason why, because remember, Legion Quest led into that alternate timeline, the Age of Apocalypse timeline. Because for Legion, he went back in time to kill off Magneto, but he had killed off Charles Xavier instead. That what created that alternate timeline. And so for Nate, he never met Charles. To him, the X-Men were led by Magneto. And so you have Charles realizing that he has to dip out and try a different method as a way to bring Nate Gray into the fold of the X-Men. Now, after all of that, you didn't have Charles Xavier go back to his physical body. Now, when he does, it's really more of him now being confronted by Blacksmith, where he does tell Blacksmith like, hey, listen, so that plan right there did not work out at all. And so now for Nate Gray, it does seem like he will no longer trust the X-Men, no longer trust Charles Xavier, because in this reality, the X-Men are not being led by Magneto, by somebody else completely different. Now, the next issue, we're really going to pick up with a character known as the Executioner. Now, for the Executioner, he is a character who don't really hate mutants. He just hates the idea of bad mutants. He believes that bad mutants should be punished in the way of, well, death. And so if you are a mutant, you kill somebody, in his mindset, you have to die. And so we currently see him right now plotting to go after one particular character, and that would be Rogue. And so now it's time for X-Man to meet Rogue for the very first time in Marvel Comics. And let's not forget that for Rogue, at this point in time, she's no longer part of the X-Men. She left the team behind because back at the very end of Legion Quest, her and Gambit had kissed. Now, when they had kissed, it gave her the ability to look into his mind because they believed the world or universe was going to end. But of course, it did not. But of course, with her looking into his mind, she saw some of his dark secrets. It had made her freak out and wanting to leave. And so at this point, it's just her on her own away from the X-Men. But while you have Rogue just trying to mind her business, you didn't have Nate Gray crash nearby her. Now here's the thing, because for Rogue, she wants to make sure that Nate Gray is okay. The dude just crashed right next to her. But the thing is, you have Nate tell Rogue like, hey, listen, I'm a mutant and you need to stay away from me. Now, for Nate Gray, it's him kind of believing that all humans across the world truly do hate on mutants a lot. And technically, he's right, but wrong at the same time. There are a lot of humans out there who do hate on mutants a lot, but only a few, not all the humans. But he looks at Rogue as another human, not knowing that one, she's Rogue, and two, she is a mutant. Now, when he tries to read her mind, it does become a problem. You see, for Rogue, over the years in Marvel Comics, she had touched a lot of people, and that's technically a problem because with her powers, when she does touch somebody else, she does absorb their powers, but also their memories as well. And sometimes their personas go into her mind. And so technically, inside her mind, there are many different personas of different people, including hers in her own mind. And so for Nate Gray, when he tries to read her mind, it's like a battleground with all these different personas just battling against one another in the mind of Rogue. And it makes him freak out. Now, it does end up with Rogue being able to knock him out to allow him to get some rest, but to also have him calm down a tad bit. Now, for Charles Xavier, he does kind of realize that Nate Gray is not Strife, so they're not really fully concerned all the way like they should be when it comes to Strife. But they also kind of still feel concerned because Nate Gray is still young, a young boy with the powers of Cable, but without the idea of the techno-organic virus getting in his way. And so you have Charles say, I have to let everyone know about this powerful mutant. And so he calls up Moira McTaggart and tells Moira what he did to him in the last chapter. The whole idea of Nate Gray pulling Charles out of the astral plane. And for Moira McTaggart, she's kind of like, whoa, that's really powerful because not even the Phoenix could do that to you. That's a really powerful person there. Now, as we transition back over to Rogue and also Nate Gray, you have Nate Gray finally wake up and the two characters are now able to have a conversation with one another. Now, with their conversation, it's really more him finding out that this is Rogue. Now, in his reality, Rogue was two things. One of the leaders of the X-Men, but two, she was married to Magneto, but back in his reality. And so in this reality, she's not with Magneto, and she's not the leader of the X-Men, but he still believes it's his Rogue. But then he remembers, oh yeah, I'm not in my reality, I'm in a brand new reality. Now, with all that being said, you also have Rogue try to tell him like, hey, listen, the X-Men are not bad people. Now, he tells her like, hey, listen, I'm trying my best to find Moira McTaggart. Now, she believes that he may have the legacy virus because why else would you go over to Muir Island for to see Moira McTaggart? But while you have the two characters talking to one another, that is when they get attacked by good old Executioner. Now, the reason why you have the Executioner going after Rogue is because, okay, there was a whole storyline going on with Rogue when it came to her powers first manifesting. When they did manifest, she was with a young boy known as Cody, a young boy that she really did care for a lot. Now, when her powers had manifested and he touched her, well, he fell into a coma and stayed in a coma ever since. Now, recently, he had finally passed on. But the problem is for the Executioner, he he blames Rogue for what had happened to Cody, which technically he is right, but you do have him here trying to kill off Rogue. Now for Nate, he wants to protect Rogue, and you have Nate use his powers to fight back against Executioner, where at first he is winning, but once again his powers begin to drain him to the point where Rogue has to jump back into the battle to help him out. Now, by the end of this battle, you do have our two characters being able to take him down very easily, but just barely, and he does teleport away for another battle down the road. Now, the ending of the book is really more of Rogue telling Nate Gray where to go. Like, hey, you can find Moira Taggart on Muir Island. So you have Nate leave to go find Moira Taggart. Now, here's the thing, because she does call up Moira Taggart to warn her, like, hey, you have a young mutant coming your way, and he's very powerful, but also kind of confused on how to control his powers. Now, this does lead into a two-part storyline where it's Excalibur fighting against Nate Gray, but we'll cover that storyline in a different video. But this is where we're going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later.